In the quiet town of Glendale, nestled between towering mountains and dense forests, a small river had once been the heart of the village. The river, known as Whistler's Stream, glistened with crystal-clear waters that reflected the sunlight in shimmering silver streaks. It was a place where children played, families gathered, and the wildlife flourished. The river, a symbol of life, bound the village together, providing them with nourishment, recreation, and even peace during the most tumultuous of times. However, as the years passed, the river began to show signs of neglect. The villagers, distracted by their busy lives and the rapid growth of technology, stopped caring for it. The once pristine waters turned murky, filled with the waste of human activity. The wildlife vanished, the fish died, and the once bustling banks of the river became a ghostly reminder of what had been lost. One late afternoon, when the sun dipped low behind the mountains and cast long shadows across the town, a young boy named James stood by the edge of Whistler's Stream. He was a quiet, curious soul, always observing the world around him. His parents, both doctors, had little time to spend with him, and he had become accustomed to wandering the village alone, his thoughts often drifting like the currents of the river he loved so much. That evening, as he sat on a large rock near the water, he noticed the subtle change that had begun to creep into the river. The water, which had once been a dazzling blue, was now a dull grayish-brown, the surface dotted with plastic bottles, wrappers, and the debris of human neglect. The fish that had once darted joyfully between the rocks were nowhere to be seen, and the gentle murmur of the river had turned into a sickly gurgle. James felt a pang of sadness in his heart, but it wasn't just the river that troubled him. It was the people who had once cared for this sacred waterway, who had stopped noticing its pain. He knew that the river had always been a lifeline for the town, a connection to the land, to nature, and to each other. And now, it seemed like that bond was being severed by the careless actions of those who should have known better. Determined to make a change, James began to visit the river every day, watching its slow decline, feeling the weight of its death. As he sat by its banks, he could almost hear the river calling out to him, as if asking for help, but it was a faint whisper, too soft for anyone else to hear. At first, he tried to clean the river on his own. Armed with a pair of rubber gloves and an old bucket, he waded into the water, picking up pieces of trash and debris. But the task was far too great for one boy to handle. He was exhausted by the sheer volume of waste that had accumulated over the years, and yet the river seemed as polluted as ever. That night, after a long, fruitless attempt at cleaning, James sat alone in his room, staring out at the moonlit sky. The problem seemed insurmountable. How could one person possibly save something so vast and wounded? But then, a thought came to him, a thought that made his heart race with excitement. If he couldn't do it alone, maybe he didn't have to. Maybe the village, the people who lived there, could help. He wasn't alone. Together, they could restore the river to its former glory. The next day, James took a deep breath and began speaking to his friends at school. At first, they were skeptical. Why bother, they asked. It's just a river. But James didn't give up. He explained that the river was more than just water. It was the soul of their village. It connected them, provided for them, and had been there long before they had arrived. If they didn't act now, it could be lost forever. Slowly, his classmates began to understand. They saw the passion in his eyes, the determination that burned like a fire in his chest, and they knew he wasn't going to let go of this dream. One by one, other students joined him. Some brought gloves, some brought bags for trash, and some brought ideas for ways to make the cleanup more effective. Even the teachers, who had initially dismissed the idea as a child's whim, began to take notice. The principal, a stern woman named Mrs. Thornton, who had lived in Glendale for decades, saw how serious James was. She agreed to provide the school's support for the initiative. With a newfound sense of purpose, the group of children, now calling themselves the River Guardians, set to work.
Whispering echoes.